Well, what a wonderful welcome to country. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Carol Gigliotti. She's a dual citizen of both Canada and the States. She's a Emerita Professor at Emily Carr University of Art and Design. Her edited collection, Leonardo's Choice, if you haven't read it, is a really wonderful collection of essays exploring how we've manipulated, how we've used science to manipulate animals and how unethical that is. I very much appreciate and respect Carol's value-driven stance. She's very open about that. In a recent book, 2022, The Creative Lives of Animals, which is why we got Carol to come and speak at this Animal Cultures Conference. It's a perfect kind of match, I think. I'm not sure if Carol will explain this, but if not, you can read her book. The conceit of humans assuming that we're the only ones with language, with culture, with skills, with purpose, with emotions, and so forth. I spent much of yesterday with Carol and it was a wonderful experience, so I won't speak any further and just welcome her warmly. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Hi. I have to stand over here by the mic. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which University of Sydney is located, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we pay our respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. Thank you very much. Thank you to Peter, wherever he is, and the entire committee who was involved in bringing me here. I am very grateful. Title of the talk. So, first I'm going to start with a little story. When I was about, 28 or so, maybe 27, no, not 27, 27, let's say. And I had just gotten out of graduate school. I did my MFA, and I went back to Chicago. The graduate school was in Illinois, but anyway, I went to see a friend in Chicago, and I stayed with her and her parents. And her parents had me to dinner, and we're sitting at the dining room table, and everybody's eating, and they actually gave me vegetarian food. And then her mother said to me, "You're Italian, aren't you?" Now, I was old enough at that point to know if somebody said, "You're Italian, aren't you?" that something else was coming. So I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, She said, "We went to Italy." She said, "Oh, it was disgusting. It was dirty. There was trash everywhere. There was clothes out on lines, on the balconies, and it was just awful." And I was like, okay. Well, I said, I've been to Italy, and actually I really enjoyed it, especially, with all the artists, wonderful artists that are there, like Da Vinci and Michelangelo. And she heard Michelangelo's name, and she said, "We went to the Sistine Chapel. It was okay. But," she said, "that Michelangelo, he never finished anything." And as you can see, these are the pieces she was talking about. If you know these pieces or you don't, you can see that they're absolutely amazing pieces that Michelangelo did. And whether or not he considered them finished or not is just something that only he will know. They're still pretty amazing. So we, did that for quite a while, but I won't go into more of that, just to know that I sometimes feel like that when I am talking about all the wonderful qualities of, and I need my glasses, wonderful qualities of animals and their creativity and culture. It should make a difference, I say to myself, but does it? Now, obviously, I don't feel like that with this audience. So I'm going to discuss these cultural qualities because I have an audience. And I really do think they are important to know. The more we talk about animals, their individuality, their agency, their creativity, their cultures, and are armed, if you will, with this knowledge, the more difficult it will be to discount animals as less than humans and available for our use. I believe that animals are essential and powerful beings. Respecting other cultures, even though they are different, is kind of a limited way of understanding the essential power of culture itself. Recognizing both similarities in cultures and difference must not be lost in that phrase, even though. The key idea really is that how can we allow knowledge about animals' cultures to prompt others to respect animals for who they are, both like us and different? Understanding the power of difference is the key. So I've come to the study of animal culture through varying paths, my ongoing interest in creativity, and for what, for me, is a connected interest, that of animal activism. In my book, The Creative Lives of Animals, I was able to synthesize, I'm just going to move this over a little bit here so I can stand over here, ideas from research on creativity, ethics, ethology, conservation, and evolutionary biology in order to redefine what I felt was an outdated and unhelpful definition of creativity. So, here it is. I am defining creativity as a dynamic process in which novel and meaningful behaviors are generated by individuals with the possibility of affecting others at cultural, species, and evolutionary levels. So, the creative process, and notice I said process, is not the only way culture is generated by animals or humans, of course, but it is the way I began to understand how important acknowledging and respecting how animals differ from humans and each other in constructing their particular cultural behaviors. It became clear to me when reading widely in the fields I mentioned and others that a shift was coming in the biological sciences. It had arrived as I finished the book. Mostly younger biologists and conservationists were busy deconstructing two long-held dogmas in biology and conservation science, both of which I assume you are familiar with in one way or another within your chosen disciplines. The first dogma pertains to how scientists approach the animals they study, viewing them as mere representatives of a species, and this really has begun to shift, and that's a good thing, to recognizing the individuality and complexity of each animal as a unique, sentient being with their own personality, preferences, behaviors, and experiences. Now, the second dogma to be dismantled is the conventional view that anthropomorphism should be avoided in biology and conservation science, and I know we've all heard that. In its place, though, what is becoming the standard in even biological sciences for people like conservationists and ethologists is critical anthropomorphism. And that's become a legitimate scientific tool. The more I read and experienced how deeply creative animals are, it became clear to me that the long-held belief that only humans were hosts to that quality was a fundamental misunderstanding of evolution itself. Simply put, if animals' creative processes contribute to widening circles of influence that include cultures, species, and evolutionary levels, they are contributing to biodiversity through their processes. I'm not sure what that was. Their creativity is fundamental to creating conditions for life on this planet. Certainly, their inclusion in the discussions of creativity is long overdue. I would like to offer a few examples of the creativity of animals that contribute to their cultures and often to wider circles of influence, such as biodiversity and evolution itself. These examples will resonate with examples from the second part of the talk that deals directly with culture. And they also offer some views of how animals' creativity may play a role in building cultures. I'm hearing noises from the, just want to be sure I'm all, okay. So, Julie, my first example, how many people have heard this one? No? Only a couple? Oh, good. I keep thinking, and please bear with me, I really, when I first was asked, I was like, what am I going to tell these people? They know everything. So please, when you don't know it, I'm going to be really excited because then you know, I am here for a reason. My first example is the spread of grass earrings, you can see right there, originally worn by Julie, a chimpanzee studied by researchers for over a year in the Chimpanzee Wildlife Orphanage Trust in Zambia. Julie initially stuck a stiff piece of long grass in her ear, adjusted it, and then wore it through daily activities. 8 out of the 12 members of the chimpanzee group engaged in the same behavior for the year, documenting a spontaneous and rather creative fashion tradition in this chimpanzee community. Now, I suspect that Julie uniquely solved the problem of living in an enclosed environment, even one with native habitat. Her goal might have been a bit of creative control over her behavior in otherwise limited circumstances. And that, I think, is interesting particularly. Neophilia, being excited by new experiences, encourages new behavior among individual animals. This openness may lead to a combination of exploration, working memory, and cognitive power, enabling a truly new product, such as a tool, that is useful to the creator and others of their species. The range found in animal creativity, just as seen in human creativity, is very broad and deserves our open minds, a willingness to experience behaviors in a new way, and comfort with complexity. These qualities, the same qualities associated with creative behavior, assist us in appreciating animals for who they are and understanding how creativity is often an integral part of their everyday lives. So that shift in how biologists are both referring to whom they are studying and the use of the once forbidden anthropomorphism is well represented in the following examples. And this is my favorite example. One of the least appreciated aspects of architectural design is the choice of location. An individual human architect may find it easier to make decisions based on her concerns, but allow a committee, and I know we all know this, have had this experience, to help with the decision, and suddenly the task of getting everyone to agree seems monumental. Honeybees have solved the tricky problem of group decision-making, which we have really not solved. In late spring or early summer, colonies of honeybees swarm. The swarming entails the queen bee and approximately half the worker bees are leaving to establish a new colony. This allows a daughter queen and the rest of the workers to continue living and working in the old colony. Now, the new colony must find a new advantageous site to call home. In the mid-1990s, Robert Seeley and his colleagues decided to revisit Lindauer's research, and Lindauer was a graduate student of Carl van Frisch, but did amazing research that allowed Seeley then to build on that, find out exactly how the scout bees, the bees who helped to find the new nest, and there's a group of about 300 or so, 150 to 300, and they have to implement the very precise wish list for the perfect honeybee colony location, one whose precision requires both memory and intelligence to fulfill. So Seeley, implementing video equipment, and his colleagues worked with smaller swarms of about 4,000 bees, and I will start the video in a minute, identified each bee and recorded each dance performed by each bee scout. At first, the researchers considered the tempting hypothesis of consensus and that would be an agreement of dancing scouts forming among the bees. But Seeley and his colleagues actually, however, kept looking and trying to understand, affirmed that a quorum, which is that mostly everybody agrees, is the essence of the bees' group decision-making process. Seeley offers 3 significant factors bees rely on to make a successful decision. And this is one of the reasons why I think this is so great. The first rests on how a group of nest scouts, up to several hundred members, is organized in a decentralized way. Decentralized. There's no top scout bee saying, nope, we're not going there. Everybody plays a role. Each individual scout bee. The scouts share all their suggestions through waggle dancing, which is bees' language, from those suggestions that are poor to the few that seem to fit the bill. This ensures that the best possible site will be considered. The second factor is the competition that ensues among the scouts advertising for their particular alternative. One particularly important indicator of the value of this process, and this is another really important thing and really wonderful that Seeley was able to really pinpoint it, is that when an uncommitted scout is recruited to a site, she doesn't just say, oh, okay, no. She first examines the site herself, and if she deems it worthy, only then does she dance to recruit more bees to the cause. So honesty is really important. This independence and honesty of judgment is essential for such an important decision. The third factor is the quorum sensing process, which Seeley admits is still a puzzle. Provides a balance between the independent opinions of the scouts and the need to limit the time the colony is homeless. I mean, there really is a necessity here. As Seeley explains, thus, the quorum sensing method of aggravating the bees' information allows diversity and independence of opinion to thrive, but only long enough to ensure that a decision error is improbable. And what's interesting about that is knowing when to stop when you are done with a creative project is one of the most difficult steps, at least I think so, in the creative process. So let me just, I hope, I might have to go over to, they set me up so that, no, we're not, oh, there we go.
Direction to her son,
And,
like the direction of the waggling. For example,
and can you hear him at all?
she's
No.
orienting
Okay, so let me just,
waggling. She's orienting her
let me just say, they're waggling, and you can see his finger. He's pointing right here, and you can see her going back and forth, and she's going. And as she is going down or up, she's pointing the direction of where she wants the other bees to go. And that's truly amazing. I think, and I'm not sure exactly how long we want to do this because you can't hear him.
sun is of the sun, and then go off, fly off in a direction that would be.
So that's what they do. They, what they do, and this is pretty amazing, is they go off, and it could be, they literally say how far away it is with their dance. And the other bees go and they find the tree or the spot where that nest is. And it's sometimes, a mile or 2 miles away. And what Seeley says is, I couldn't do that. They are completely conveying with that dance not only how far away it is, but the particular tree. It's pretty amazing. Let me just see if there's any more important.
It's indicating the direction to her site by the
Anyway, okay. So we're going to go on to cleaner fish. Everybody know about cleaner fish? Yes? Oh, okay, but we'll do it anyway. Cleaner fish, not fish who are cleaner than others, but fish who clean up other fish for a living, are the central characters in one example of many fish cooperation biologist Redouan Bashari has studied. In the coral reefs of the Red Sea of Egypt, he and his graduate students study the cognition, social cooperation, and idiosyncrasies of both the cleaners and the clients. In small coral territories called cleaner stations, multicolored wrasse cleaner fishes, and you see one here, and this is sort of an amazing photograph. I mean, it's like being at the dentist, only the dentist like dives into your mouth. A favorite delicacy of theirs. Oh, multicolored wrasse cleaner fishes industriously chew the parasites, and they love that mucus. So, unfortunately, if they bite off too much, or if they take it for themselves, the fish that's being cleaned will give a jolt, and then, you know, Bashari was able to say, oh yeah, that particular cleaner fish was not being very fair or honest. The client would jolt from the bite. And so the cleaner fish, in this agreement between cleaner fish and the fish that are being cleaned, that agreement was broken. And then what Bashari did was he used game theory. And game theory, the study of mathematical models of conflict and cooperation between intelligent, rational decision makers. Bashari was able to analyze the behaviors of the cleaner fishes, their clients, as a market economy. In the case of cleaner fish and their clients, factors like numerous clients, local or non-local clients, or the presence of other clients watching while the cleaning was taking place determined how the cleaner fish treated their clients. Just as some store owners overcharge when there are many other customers, an abundance of clients would tempt the cleaner fish to take bites out of the client's mucus more often. Some cleaner fishes with a known deceptive disposition were being watched by other clients and instead behaved well, stopping themselves from biting the client they were working on. Cleaners also reconciled with clients whom they had bitten by massaging the clients' backs with their pelvic fins. But some clients did not always accept the reconciliation massage tactic. However, especially if they had had an ongoing client relationship with the cleaner. So in an angry state, these clients chased the cleaner around, resulting in those particular cleaner fish cheating less for a while. Bashari and primatologist Sarah Bronson, taking game theory to heart, devised several trials in which the cleaner fish, capuchin monkeys, chimpanzees, and orangutans were tested with colored fluid plates. And this is the part that I wish they hadn't done. Not because they compared them, but because, you know, they obviously had them in a captive environment. The game was to see how quickly any of the animals realized that the food on the differently colored temporary plate should be eaten first before it was taken away. The cleaner fishes prevailed in this test and also came out in front when given a more advanced version that switched the function of the colored plates. Whether all cleaner fish happen to be smarter than primates is not the point. Frans de Waal points to Bashari's work explicitly when he says, primate chauvinism may now be poised to decline thanks in large part to Bashari's fish work. They now really have to take on board that most species are going to have a smart intelligence. Bashari's work encouraged many other younger ethologists, and that's something I did note. There were older ethologists who, and I'm always older, I'm interested in age now because, you know, I'm older. And the sort of stars, you know, who really have been out there for a while. And then many of the research papers that I read came from younger people. So what his work did was allowed these younger ethologists to frame their research on a wider range of species. And we've begun to see field studies of many social animals across species who constantly and flexibly adjust to information and resources in social areas and other areas of their lives, often taking creative advantage of opportunities that might be beneficial to them and their group. The beaver. Now, I looked this up. It wasn't really too clear. There are no beavers in Australia, as far as I know, right? Okay, in the North America and in some parts of Latin America and then Europe, there are beavers, and this is what beavers look like. I'm just going to play this silently, so you can just watch, because it's really wonderful. Obviously, they've been depleted, so that now they are 15% in North America of their original count. But they're gaining respect again, and from really unusual people. Beavers build elaborate dams and canals to control or create water flow, establish desirable water levels to ensure the safety of their communal family lodge, and generate essential transportation arteries for finding food and moving building materials. So since the beaver, as you can see, is he's great in the water, but on land he's like kind of clumsy because he waddles. So they build canals so they can shift what they want down the stream to where they want it. No two situations they inhabit require the same set of designs to solve the hydraulic problems at hand. Conservationists, ecologists, and biologists are now documenting how beavers' dams protect against climate change in their historical habitat. Their dams are uniquely constructed to raise the water table alongside a stream, preventing erosion as the trees and plants there become stabilized. The dams also contribute to a vastly improved fish and wildlife habitat while promoting new and rich soil. So beaver dams do everything that human dams do, only for free and better. And let's see. A recent study on the building methods and results of beaver dams by engineers, these are hydraulic engineers. It must be considered that beavers and their dams have existed in rivers for more than 15 million years, and that the river ecosystems and species evolved around them. Now that is contributing to biodiversity in an enormous way. As an instance of ecosystems and other species needing what individual animals create, the building process of the beaver offers a model for the creative process in animals. Another thing that's really interesting about beavers is that they live in monogamous pairs with 1 or 2 litters of kits born each year. Family life can be a bit crowded since the kits stay for at least 2 years, sometimes 3, before going off to make their own families. As the family grows, beavers will often enlarge the lodge upward or begin to dig a tunnel to a higher living room, but eventually the family may have multiple lodges differing in both location and style. And here's where it gets interesting. Many beaver families live happily and peacefully in their lodges with muskrats, mice, water voles, and flying insects. Perhaps after all that work, they want to share the perfection of their labor. But I think that's quite wonderful. The largest beaver dam, and let's just go back. I don't have any tools on here. I can't see them, unfortunately, because of all the stuff that they did. But basically, that really large dam that you saw was recorded in Albert's Wood Buffalo National Park and is 2,790 feet long and only discovered by researchers using Google Earth in October 2007. The second longest beaver dam in the world is 2,139 feet long and is located in Three Forks, Montana. Austrian ethologist Karl van Frisch, and this was a while ago, notes, on the whole, the architectural achievements of mammals are not very impressive. The order of rodents is, where's Emily, however, an exception in that it contains, comparatively speaking, quite a number of clever builders. He discusses the tunnels of moles, the burrows of badgers, wood rats and marmots, the nests of harvest mice, dormice, and squirrels, and of course, the elaborate building of beavers. Writing in the mid-20th century, von Frisch was able to describe the longevity of some dams. Large dams are maintained by generations of beavers and their families over a period of many years. And we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of culture later. Perhaps even centuries, and are constantly adapted to the changes in the water level. A skilled hydro engineer could not regulate the water level any better. And I did read a wonderful paper by hydro engineers who said the same thing. It's difficult then for anyone studying beavers firsthand to dismiss their behavior and that of other members of the order Rodentia as simply instinctual. Across species, animals exhibit creativity, even those animals we as humans generally find dispensable. So, a little bit about animal culture in terms of what I found, and this was probably early, I started the book about 2012. And I found animal culture still being handled as a contentious topic in fields such as psychology, biology, anthropology, evolutionary biology, and ecology, and philosophy. So over time, what constitutes an acceptable, even important topic may alter if enough brain power and political will support its study. In 2009, the book The Question of Animal Culture, edited by biologist Kevin Leyland and psychologist Bennett Galef, included writers from a wide selection of these fields. Opinions in the book were divided, with skepticism coming from one psychologist, 3 anthropologists, and 1 philosopher out of 15 chapters. 6 years later, a National Academy of Science colloquium about the extension of biology through culture hosted researchers studying both human and animal culture. So the culture wars, and they really did call them that, in which proponents of animal culture and naysayers on the topic published effusively to support their side of the argument, have ended. An increasing number of new studies demand that we recognize that many animal species not only creatively innovate, but often change their cultural traditions by doing so. Andrew Whitten and his colleagues, who led the Sackler colloquialism, why do I keep saying that? Colloquium. It's kind of colloquialism is what a colloquium is. Recall that it was not until the mid-20th century that the idea of other species besides the human transmitting cultural information through their behavior became a topic worthy of scientific investigation. And now, here we are, the way a cultural, and this is interesting to me, the interdisciplinary nature of animal studies as a whole is one of the reasons why I love it so much. The way a cultural anthropologist defines culture substantially differs from the way a sociologist does. So, and an art historian defines it differently still. So as Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell explain in their seminal book, I'm sure most of you have read it, The Cultural Lives of Whales and Dolphins, culture is important to many fields. They explain, culture is central to anthropology, art history, and this is a quote, some areas of psychology and archaeology, but it is also studied by sociologists, biologists, economists, and historians. A scholar's definition of culture often highlights what he or she studies. Those studying human culture and basing their definitions on the distinguishing characteristics of that species, and that species alone, might miss the cultural and behavioral nuances belonging to other species. Whitehead and Rendell's definition of culture states, information or behavior shared by a population or subpopulation, which is acquired from conspecifics through some form of social learning. And that social learning category is something we'll talk about. This definition is like those of other researchers in how they prioritize the words information and behavior. They agree with others who see culture as a way that behavior moves from animal to animal in contrast to genetic inheritance. Okay, that's pretty basic. Culture may interact with genetic evolution on a large scale, less basic. Philosopher of biology Grant Ramsey has constructed another definition, hoping human cultural researchers and those who study culture in animals might use it. What he says is, quote, information transmitted between individual or groups where this information flows through and brings about the reproduction of and lasting change in the behavioral trait, unquote. Now, this definition omits what he perceives as the somewhat vague and controversial concept of social learning, which I think it is, and does not predetermine who exhibits culture. He also says, if guppies, lizards, or octopuses transfer information amongst themselves in such a way that it flows through and brings about the reproduction of and a lasting change in a behavioral trait, then it's a cultural species. I like the content of that change as it encourages research on cultures across species that do not fit the assumption that only social learning can transfer cultural information, and adds the possibility of change being inherent in its spread. Another thing I found was that early on, I used, in the book, and one of the reviewers saw that I had used the word teaching from a research paper by someone who was studying ants and said they teach each other, and the reviewer was just beside themselves. I mean, they were, oh my God, I had committed a great sin. Also, just back to that definition by Ramsey, he also clearly links innovation, the product of creative behavior, exploratory behavior, or environmental response. So obviously I like that because of that. But what I appreciate, and now, you know, we're going to get kind of out of the like stuff. What I appreciate most in Whitehead and Rendell's work with whales and dolphins is their firsthand knowledge of the animals they study. They could not have chosen an order of animals whose behavior is more difficult to investigate, since most of it takes place underwater and over immense ranges of the ocean. Whitehead and Rendell have spent a combined total of 50 years observing and documenting the behavior of wild whales and dolphins. Several well-known culture researchers insist on experimental work in captivity as a necessary legitimizing seal of approval for whether still culture exists in animals. But the observations and data analyses made by the combined knowledge, experience, and tenacity of Whitehead and Rendell prove the case that field research yields knowledge of behavior missed are not available in a captive environment. And you know, you think to yourself, duh, isn't that obvious? But Still, maybe not to some scientists, studies on captive animals are carried out under human constraints that often hinder any actual social behavior, let alone innovative or cultural behavior. And we know that Tony Frohoff, Laurie Marino and Tony Frohoff have talked about this, particularly about wild-caught and captive-born cetaceans. But one of the things that I really admired about Whitehead and Rendell and their lifetime of work on cetaceans is in this way. This is how they put it. We whale scientists only stumbled onto whale culture in the first place, and our discoveries are still largely the result of long-term, large-scale observation together with happenstance. Lots of happenstance. And that's a quote from them. And I just love that because that is how you find things. It's a very creative way to work. So hoping to clarify just how much work has been accomplished by researchers on social learning and animal culture, a 2017, which is now kind of old, but you know, it's not that old, review reported that 100 research groups published work covering 66 species, with 2/3 involving field research with wild animals. These included mammals, primates, fishes, birds, and insects. And science changes constantly, so reptiles now, however, have a place in this group of cultural species. So that was supposed to be up the whole time you were hearing about Hal Whitehead, sorry. And it's a video, but I'm going to just go past it because I don't want to run over time here. So, and this is sort of, you know, my new research on culture in animals. What ideas in animal cultural research can we take with us in our quest to make life better for animals, both wild and domesticated? The examples I just gave you from my book held many of these characteristics with my focus on creativity, but creativity and innovation is only one area in which we're able to understand how animals live within their cultures. Even if we wanted to start with a definition of human culture, which we do not, that we might use as a template, we would be hard-pressed to find one not geared towards the discipline in which it belongs. If we are to really learn from animals about their lives, then I think it's better to look for examples that come from the actual animal included and studied. So, the categories of characteristics of animal cultures, I've kind of listed up here, and they're really my list. I'm sure, you know, if there was a ethologist or biologist in here, is there? Yeah? No? Well, they're mine anyway, and you know, at this point, I just gave up the thing that, you know, I'm an artist and I can't study science. The categories, as you see, are just mine, and also I really feel that the research is just starting, and there's going to be much more of it. So I'm not going to talk about creativity, obviously, because I just did for like a half an hour. Right now, it's personalities, and it's individually, when there's a lot of study on personalities, and that's what we can use as individuality and personhood. The idea of personhood in animal law is very important. Let's see, where am I? Oh, okay. The research in animal personalities, as I just said, but this is kind of funny. I just read a study that actually asked for a unified methodology for personality studies. And I think a quote from this paper will kind of allow us to understand how that wish will probably never be fulfilled. The paper says, particularly our study showed that statistical, now they weren't studying animals, they were studying the papers of the scientists who study animals. So particularly our study showed that statistical and conceptual definitions do not always agree, which suggests that conceptual definitions are sometimes not in accordance with research objectives, data sampling design, and or the applied statistical approach. I just had to laugh at that. Of course not. I mean, you know, you just are not going to be able to pin every single animal down to what you think, at least a person who's not studying that animal thinks is important because you haven't studied the animal. The study of human personality has its own discipline, right? Psychology. While researchers in animal personality are being expected to fit all the intricacies of 2.13 million species into one area, one area of one discipline. The point here is that the work in animal personality is based on the individuality of that particular animal being studied and their agency. And agency is understood then through an animal's adaptive, context-specific, and complex behaviors that are predicated on their sentience, individuality, lived experiences, cognition, sociality, and cultures. Now, this kind of research really is the actual research with individual animals, with on the ground, in the field, is really inspiring. And I think it would be quite useful for those of us who are interested in shifting things for animals to use that. Hopefully it can be implemented. And anyway, I do think that it could be implemented in a broad way. So let's go to the next slide. Do you know who this is? Sleepy, yeah. Oh, it didn't go? Okay, there. Do you know who this is? I didn't until I started studying for this particular keynote, and I'm very grateful. Where's Peter? Well, to anybody that invited me, now I know who they are. Sleepy lizards, and I'm not going to call them anything else. I know they have a lot of different names. So thanks for the gift. Researchers wanted to find out whether either the reproductive performance hypothesis or the mate familiarity hypothesis could explain many sleepy lizards' remarkable long-term monogamy, though they are thought of as a solo or a solitary species. Now, the reproductive performance hypothesis predicts higher reproductive success in more experienced parents, whereas the mate familiarity hypothesis suggests that effects of partner familiarity select for partner retention and long-term monogamy. And these lovely I love that photo. These lovely sleepy lizards, at least in the research that, and I think it was Mike Bull, who's now dead, unfortunately, but the research is still going on. 31 partnerships lasted for more than 15 years, 110 for more than 10 years, and then the recorded maximum was 27 years, and that particular relationship is still ongoing. I know. It turns out after 40 years of research in the field, the conclusion was that less aggressive male lizards had more success hanging on to their mates over the years. I'm not going to say anything about that. And males have been known to grieve for their dead partners. This kind of long-term study is rich with details about the personalities and individuality of reptiles and their cultural behaviors. This particular study, I think, allowed ecology scientists to develop a model that could be used to understand and help fauna in the face of climate change. Actually, that was another paper that I read. It also started a burst in research on the social lives of reptiles, something that was not on most researchers' radar. So we're going to go to my part of the world. And we're going to talk a little bit about learning, intelligence, teaching, and creativity. So social learning occurs in species who have what researchers call social complexity. Now, you know, I would say that at this point, we really have to start thinking about the fact that all species have social complexity, no matter how solitary they are. You know, we just should start thinking about it. More solitary species such as snow leopards or tigers rarely interact outside of breeding. Other species such as honeybees are intensely social, as we have seen. Many communities fall somewhere along this spectrum, including what is called fission-fusion societies, in which members are stable to the group as a whole, but forming and disbanding temporary subgroups. Matrilinear groups have strong sociality defined by individuals remaining with their mothers and close female relatives for the majority of their lives, like whales, but other animals too. These are just some of the types of social structures found in animal species. This diversity extends to how animals learn and transmit this learning. Vertically from parent to offspring, horizontal transmission between peers throughout the community. So this can include imitation, teaching, and language, and I would add creativity, of course. Now, what you're seeing are bighorn sheep. And bighorn sheep, as I said, are in my part of the world. One of the big walls between recognizing animal culture as equal to human culture is the notion that animal culture is not cumulative, in which each generation adds to culturally transmitted information. And I have been reading several papers that say, yeah, you know, they have cultures, but it's not cumulative culture. There's always a wall. There's always something else. There's always this next step, right? It's like being in a bad relationship. Ungulates accumulate knowledge of local life cycle events. Now, these are ungulates, hoofed animals, bighorn sheep, that are influenced by climatic patterns over time via what's called the ratcheting effect. In other words, each generation augments culturally transmitted information with information gained from their own experience, a process known as cumulative cultural evolution. So, across the globe, anthropocentric barriers have disrupted ungulate migrations, triggered declines in population abundance, and even caused local extinctions. Cultural transmission, therefore, acts as a second non-genetic inheritance system. So, in other words, this is a really big thing. This, you know, animals migrate, and they migrate for particular reasons. That is part of their culture. That inheritance system from a non-genetic source shapes their foraging and migratory behavior, and ultimately provides the primary mechanism by which their migrations have evolved. Migrating animals track or surf, I did not make that up, that's like a scientific word, surf. High quality forage at the leading edge of spring, and the high quality forage at the leading edge of spring are called green waves. Those two things I was just so excited about. I was like, geez, this is great, I didn't know that. Researchers found that this surfing knowledge of bighorn sheep from historical populations was approximately twice that of transplanted animals. Now, why would you transplant animals? Anybody have any ideas? Development. Cattle raising. This is why these guys have been moved around, believe it or not, because, you know, people want to raise what? This suggested that knowledge about local green waves may improve over time as animals learn culturally and culturally transmit information. So in other words, not just learn what's back there, but build on that about the seasonal, especially in climate change, about the seasonal distribution of high quality forage. So this is empirical evidence that learning and cultural transmission underlie the establishment and maintenance of ungulate migration. And what you sort of can see there, I mean, you don't have to like really understand it. It took me, I don't know how long to even barely understand what all that says. I live over there in Oregon, like the middle of Oregon, but they've been moving both moose, I don't know if you can hear me, moose and bighorn sheep around. And of course, what they found is that transplanted, in this case, bighorn sheep, did not do well because they weren't in their area to use the knowledge that they had. So, actual conservation of existing, and this is really important for wildlife corridors of every kind, and the idea that we're going to have to put aside space for animals, of existing, conservation of existing migration corridors, stopover sites, and seasonal ranges not only protects the landscapes that ungulates depend on, but such efforts also maintain the traditional knowledge and culture that migratory animals use to bolster fitness and sustain their populations. And then add to that knowledge, which they're going to need because the climate is changing. Okay, I'm not going to talk about language because I have a chapter of it in the book, but there are so many books, and I know probably, maybe they're all familiar to you, but I just wanted to put them up there because there's some wonderful work being done on animal languages, so much different. You know, I used to read books on animal language and it never really worked for me, and these are just incredible. Eva Meyer is just brilliant, and if you've not known about her, I don't know how, and you should read this. Wonderful book. Kon is in the book. Kon Slobodchikov is a prairie dog researcher and has really proved that prairie dogs have what he calls language with grammar and syntax. And I love it what other scientists have said is now, not now, but early on, is that, you know, you look at his research and you just can't really argue with it. Darn. Chasing Dr. Dolittle, Learning the Language of Animals, Kon Slobodchikov. The Great Animal Orchestra is a much earlier book, Finding the Origins of Music in the World's Wild Places by Bernie Krause. And it's a really wonderful book. And one that has a bit of sadness for me. I got the Nautilus Gold Award, and the other person who won the gold wrote The Sounds of Life, How Digital Technology is Bringing Us Closer to the Worlds of Animals and Places. And her name is Karen Backer, and unfortunately, she died this past August, and she was 48 or so. I think it's really interesting that lots of people are starting to use digital kinds of processes to understand animals. Some of it is really stupid, and some of it is really, really interesting. One of the problems I see with it, and this isn't about her book. Her book is great. But one of the problems is that it's all about oral communication, which is what we're used to. You know, we talk blah, 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 as I'm doing now. And you know, we're gifted with a fairly limited number of channels of communication compared to other animals. While we've used discoveries of natural forces, such as electromagnetism, to enhance our vocal, oral, and gestural modes of communication, animals are plugged into what seems like unlimited forms of communication. Cross species, animals make use of chemical, visual, acoustic, vibrational, sonic, bioluminescent, electric, and tactile systems of communication in unlimited combinations. Desert iguanas, for example, and this is one I really love, use scent marks to reflect ultraviolet light that other iguanas can see that tells them who has been in their territory. So you're talking smell and visual, sight at the same. That would really put us in trouble. So I have two more things to talk about. One is, and probably you know this, the cuttlefish who does the dual display. But think about that. I mean, one of the most interesting forms of language, I mean, the ability to change color and your skin texture. I love that. And just for people who don't know this, this is the male. This is a male on that side. This is a male, but on the right side, and the female's off here, he's changed his, or actually he's left his skin as to signal that he is a male. And on the other half, he's really duplicitously pretending that he is a female by changing his color and his skin texture. They manipulate their chromatophores, I really have trouble with that word, organs in the shape of elastic sacs to display red, yellow, brown, and black, contracting or relaxing bands of muscles spreading in a circle from each chromatophore, up to 200 chromatophores per 1,000th of a square inch. Cuttlefish can layer those 4 colors and their corresponding dark to light values to make whatever colors they need, much like painting in a digital software program. That's exactly what I thought of, since I do that. Also, contracting bands of circular muscle allow them to sculpt little nodes or spikes, changing their skin texture in fundamental ways. So consider that they do this not innately, and that's part of the problem. Is we've always had this idea that, oh, that's really cool, but they don't really know what they're doing. But by consciously choosing what colors, values, shapes, and textures they need to use to disappear into the environment or to best woo their chosen ones. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. I have 10:52, is that right? And we end at 11? Okay, so I'm going to just quickly talk about, the concept of mutualism. And I'm not going to give you the whole detail on belugas, but they are a really wonderful species, as all are. But they're one of the species that share their knowledge with non-kin. And this can happen, indirectly with ecological knowledge as well. Let me just go through. And one of the things, an example would be beluga whales adopt lost narwhal in St. Lawrence River. Now he's still with them, and the people who are watching this, you can see the narwhal there, right? Like the dark color with the little unicorn thing. And narwhals are totally interesting too. So what's interesting about it, of course, is everything, but also that, they do know that narwhals and belugas have mated. They found skulls, and I think they're called narlugas. Anyway, both belugas and narwhals are being quite affected by, by climate change, especially because in the Arctic ecosystem, protecting the species would entail protecting the entire Arctic ecosystem as a whole, which is what we need to do. And I'll just say this. Older members, I know you've probably read Philippa Brake's article. Older members sometimes have knowledge that if the older member is killed, the older member of the species, the matriarch perhaps, the knowledge goes with her. What this tells us is that animals of all kinds have traditions, wisdom, and a sense of justice and compassion within and sometimes outside their families. Think of beavers. Each in their own way. There is diversity within those cultures as individuals explore their geographic locations and their own abilities to learn, innovate, and contribute to their own lives and others. While I was writing this last section of the talk, I thought about artist and writer Jenny Odell, the author of How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, great book. She says in the book, quote, "We inhabit a culture that privileges novelty and growth over the cyclical and the regenerative. Indeed, our very idea of productivity is premised on the idea of producing something new, whereas we do not tend to see maintenance and care as productive in the same way." I firmly believe that animals are powerful and essential to this world, and their creativity plays an important role in that. I believe one of the reasons why animals are so essential to this world is that their cultures, in many ways, maintain and care for the planet. Without the cultures in which they thrive, many already wrecked by our race to produce more and bigger replicas of our cultures, animals will not be able to continue their activities and their lives, and ours too will suffer greatly. We know that is already happening. If we are to contribute positively to shifting the doomed scenario we've made for ourselves, we need to do everything we can to understand and communicate how complex and necessary animals and their diverse cultures are to the health and flourishing of this entire planet and all on it. Thank you.